I had an experience years ago that really freaks me out. I've always been skeptical of ghosts and similar phenomena, and I'm not religious, but this is one of the oddest things I've ever experienced. Years ago, probably around 2014, I was visiting my family in Colorado. That side of my family is into the paranormal, especially ghosts. Something we do when we meet up is use a ghost box, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. For those who aren't, it's a radio that scans across channels very quickly and supposedly picks up the voices of spirits. Not the most technical definition, but just to cover the basics. Anyways, we decided to use it one night, but didn't have anything interesting happen. So we instead decided to swap ghost stories in the backyard, which I always enjoy. Well, about half an hour into our discussion, my brother starts feeling nauseous. He's saying weird things and acting possessed, which I thought was a cheesy joke. He's pretty funny usually, so I knew something was wrong when the joke was going on for too long. Besides, our interests in the paranormal are typically limited to ghost stories, tarot readings, and energy. Needless to say, this was not in our wheelhouse of typical or expected outcomes. My aunt decided to cleanse the area with some sage, but he was saying it smelled like burning bodies, which isn't the most comforting thing to hear. Some time goes by, and he feels more normal, but still nauseous. At this moment, suddenly, there was a blue ball of light across the yard and past their fence, into their alleyway. I saw the light lower slowly towards the ground, shrinking as it descended. Descended seems to be the proper word, as it didn't seem to be falling, as it was much too slow. The ball of light got smaller and smaller until it touched the ground, remained stationary for a few seconds, then went out. There was no noise, and it seemed to just pop up out of nowhere. Nobody said a word until it was over, which is when we started freaking out all over again. We searched the next morning for anything that could have caused the light, but there was nothing. We have a few brain cells between the few of us, and ruled out flashlights, flares, reflections, etc. My aunt and cousin claimed to be more sensitive to energy and stated that it was quite intense during the experience. Any thoughts on what this could have been? I can't remember if it had been storming, but maybe it was ball lightning. No clue. Please feel free to share below. We still have no idea what happened that night. I was a Marine and deployed with the 11th MEU on the Ballo Wood. At one point, I ended up getting assigned to work with the Navy ship supply, I think it was. I worked for them for a month during the day, with nothing unusual happening. At the end of the month, I volunteered to work for them for another month if I could work the one night shift spot. They agreed. And since no other Marines wanted to get faked out to work for the Navy, I got the spot. Basically, that meant that any time any section needed a part at night, I went to get it from one of the many storage rooms throughout the ship. There came to be 3 storage rooms I preferred, not going to. C, CA, and CB. They were by far the biggest storage rooms and in the bowels of the ship, which are supposed to be completely sealed from the rest of the ship, other than the one path you take to get to them to prevent flooding in the event of a hull breach. Yet in what was perhaps the most isolated part of the ship, I would hear voices and other indications of movement in other close-by areas of those storage rooms. The first few times I would call out asking who was there, never receiving a reply, or investigate the noises, which sounded like someone else doing the same job I was, moving things around, either storing, sorting, or retrieving parts, never finding anything out of place. Eventually, I just pretended I didn't hear anything and got in and out as fast as possible. At the end of my second month on my last day, I casually, jokingly said something like, "By the way, I'm pretty sure C, CA, and CB are haunted." All the Navy personnel in the room just kept looking at me and nodded and verbally agreed that it was. I'm still very skeptical of ghosts or any kind of afterlife, but I still can't explain what I experience. Around 10 or 15 years ago, me and a friend were driving down River Road when some winged creature swooped the hood of my car, surrounding and blocking both the windshield and wrapping around to the passenger and driver side windows, and then disappeared. As we're driving, I'm telling her this story about the sleep paralysis demon I saw in a dream. It looked like a winged demon made out of molten stone with red eyes, trapped behind a stone prison that it escapes and chases me. It's dark out, maybe 9 or 10 p.m, and as I'm telling the story, as we drive under a large willow tree, and something drops out of the sky and swoops the hood of my car, filling the entire windshield, wrapping around to my side windows with wings. My friend screams and I stop the car. I remember it now as an owl with feathery wings, but part of me remembers red eyes, black fleshy wings and a human face. But I'm not sure if that's just because of what images were already running around in my head when it happened, as I was telling the story. There are owls where I was wondering if maybe that's something owls do. Swoop headlights or something. But there are no owls that would be large enough to explain what I saw. Just barn owls, and I've seen them before. So I wouldn't say I'm a believer, nor would I say I'm a skeptic either. I'd say there's been plenty of things science has yet to prove or disprove, and whether or not there are other beings beyond what we can see are real. And I've had plenty of weird experiences happen along the way that I can easily explain rationally. Half asleep and felt hands caressing my face. Oh, probably some form of sleep paralysis. Creepy feeling like something has been watching me. It's a common feeling that anyone would feel if they've been alone a lot. Figure at the foot of my bed. Again, sleep paralysis, or maybe something my mind just conjured from lack of sleep. But I can't seem to find a rational explanation for this particular experience that happened years ago at my parents' place. So just for context, my parents live in a pretty big house, and I've always felt a little off whenever I visit, but I've usually ignored the feeling. As a teenager and young adult before I moved out, I usually conduct my studying and work in the guest dining room. A little more private and quiet than my own room. It has a large wooden dining table, the sort with heavy glass on top, and it can fit around 10 people around it. So this happened a few years ago in the middle of the night. I was in the dining room. The air conditioning was on. I had a jug of water next to me. My laptop was on. My partner called me and I left the room to speak with him. I switched off the air conditioning, but when I returned not longer than 30 minutes later, I sat on my chair and rested my elbows on the glass of the table to get back to work. But then the glass started sliding, and before I knew it, a gush of water splashed on top of my lap. I jolted and removed my things to see that the entire table was filled with water in between the glass and table. I looked at my jug of water. There's still the same level of water there. Needless to say, I was freaked out. I removed my things and went to get my parents. It took all three of us to remove the heavy glass and took some time to remove all the water. My parents, for some reason, thought I had somehow placed the water there and were upset that it happened. It wasn't until later that day that this event came back to me and goosebumps appeared all over my arms thinking about it. How on earth did that much water get there? So I tried my hardest to find an explanation, and here's some that I can come up with. A. Condensation. Perhaps switching off the air conditioning helped create the right environment to cause enough condensation that water overflowed underneath. But not only is this implausible, but never has this ever happened before or after the incident. B. I had a psychotic breakdown which led me to splashing water there with the jug of water. But again, the water was still in the jug, and I was a pretty physically weak person, so there's no way I'd have removed the glass to be able to splash water onto it. Keep in mind, the water was all over the table, not in one corner. C. My parents did it when I was away. But why? D. The water was already there and built up over time from condensation, but then I'd noticed it before. I was in the dining room for hours before this incident. No way I wouldn't have noticed this. No matter how I tried to rationalise this incident with myself, I couldn't find an explanation. Everyone I've told this to has said this is probably something paranormal. I've had other experiences in my parents' home, but again, all I could explain, except for this. I was in 5th grade. We were in class upstairs, and there was a huge storm outside. Everybody had a chill when lightning struck. The lightning was getting closer and closer. I was fascinated by it, especially because I was sitting near the window. Then, a lot of lightning started to strike at the same time, and a big one was really close to us. This big lightning was really, really strange. It enlightened us for a whole second, and I could have seen some sort of white hole, almost like a breach in space. I saw it for a whole second too. I asked my school friend who was sitting next to me, "Have you seen this, the white hole?" He was affirmative. My younger self liked to imagine it was some sort of a dimensional breach for some creatures to come into our world. Every time since I heard someone talking about a paranormal event, I'm like, maybe the responsible for this event come from that breach. Of course, I don't believe it, but it's a fun theory. I visited the cemetery with a couple of friends in the spring of 2017. We arrived there around 6:30 p.m, parked at the small lot across the road from the cemetery, and made our way over. I was in a photography class at the time and brought a school-issued camera with me to take pictures. Walking into the cemetery felt sort of overwhelming, like we had walked into a lively party where everyone suddenly went quiet and stared at us, even though we were the only ones there. I took some pictures in the cemetery, and after a while we decided to walk deeper into the woods. This would turn out to be a mistake. After the three of us walked along the creek, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that was settling in, despite it still being pretty light out, and due to it being early spring, the leaves hadn't yet grown back, so we could see pretty far in every direction. Something that still creeps me out about this place is the lack of sound. I listened for the chirps and scurries of wild animals, but the only sound in the woods was our footsteps in the leaves in the creek. My camera, fully charged, died a few times, and when I turned it back on, it still had full battery. We came across multiple round clearings in the woods. There were rumours of dark magic and rituals taking place here, so at the time I attributed it to that. There was a picnic bench in one of the clearings, and I took a picture of my friends on my cell phone, standing on the bench part. They were smiling when I took the photo, but when I looked at it, their faces were distorted. My female friend appeared sad and scared, while my male friend appeared angry, but they were perfectly fine. A few minutes after taking that picture, my phone mysteriously went missing, and we searched all over the area until the sun started to go down, and we realised we needed to get the hell out of there. We ditched the phone, and my female friend managed to lead us out. As we were leaving, I saw a completely black shadow figure with a brimmed hat, walking parallel to us, maybe 10 feet into the woods. He was walking through dense woods and made no sound. I have no idea why I didn't react to this at the moment, but when I asked my male friend about this later, he said he saw it too. When we got back to my house, some unfortunate events went down with my family that were most likely inevitable, but I think the energy I brought back certainly could have contributed. When I brought the camera to my room, the energy seemed to shift, and I saw several figures and anomalies as I scrolled through the photos. I deleted them all right then. Everything felt more normal after that. Though the energy in my living room where the family thing happened was off until we moved out. Even my completely skeptical mother admitted that the lightning looked wrong and things felt off in that room after this. I'm still interested in haunted places and the paranormal, but this experience made me more wary of these things. I'm not really sure if this would be considered a paranormal story per se, but nothing else really makes sense. Let me explain. My family would go camping every chance we got. The place we'd always go had no natural predators, at least nothing bigger than a fox. My dad specifically chose this spot so us kids, me and my two siblings, could frolic through the woods without having to worry. This particular trip during the May long weekend, there was still a considerable amount of snow, so my dad brought our ATVs and some sleds for us. It was the day after we had arrived, and my dad wanted to go on a little trip down the road we came up. I asked if I could come, and he said sure. We both hopped on his quad and set out on our little trip. I forgot to mention earlier that we had deer around the area. Nothing crazy, but the odd one would wander through our campsite. You could tell they had no natural predators, since they didn't run away when there was a human around. My siblings and I would always manage to get pretty close to one, before my parents yelled at us to stay away. That is. Anyway, my dad and I were a few miles from the campsite when we rounded a corner and came across one of the most gruesome sights I've ever seen in my life. On the side of the road were pieces of a deer. At least, I think it was one. There was blood absolutely everywhere. Worse still, there was steam coming from the remains, which meant this was a recent kill. My dad's usually a pretty calm guy. Not much can rattle him. But I could tell this freaked him the hell out. He was in the process of turning us around when this, screech came from the forest. It was so loud, we both flinched. I remember searching the forest for the source, but my dad was in the process of hauling ass down the way we came. It could have been a trick of the light, or because I was freaked out and maybe I was seeing things. But I could have sworn I saw something running alongside us, but only for a second or two. I know I sound absolutely crazy, but the thing looked like a large dog before it vanished into the trees. My dad raced back to camp, and we were all packed up and headed to a different location by the end of the day. We never did go back to that campsite after this encounter. I did ask my dad about it a couple years ago. He just said it was because the new campsite was better than the old, better trails and whatnot. I think he's full of crap. I think whatever we encountered that day scared the hell out of him, and I think that whatever I saw, he did too. But I, for one, am thankful we never went back. I'm not sure if I'll be able to sleep at night after what I saw. Still haunts me to this day. My family moved from Kansas to Tennessee in 2000. I made some friends at my new high school, and we were all hanging out on Halloween. Someone told us about a local legend called the Ghost Flame. A few of my new friends wanted to check it out, and they invited me to go with them. I was skeptical, but I went out of curiosity. The legend goes like this. There's a haunted cemetery way out in the boondocks. If you park on the side of the gravel road at the entrance and turn off your headlights, you can see a ghost flame hovering over a grave. It sounded like someone was trying to pull a prank on me. One of the guys borrowed his dad's car, and we all drove out there. We parked at the entrance and cut off the headlights. We waited about 5 minutes and someone shouted, "Oh my God, look!" There it was, a tall flame hovering above a grave, just in front of the headstone. The driver of the car turned the headlights on, and the flame instantly disappeared. He turned them off, and it slowly came back. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but the skeptic in me didn't want to be the butt off some practical joke, so I walked up to the cemetery to check it out. As I approached this flame, I could see that it was actually hovering about 6 feet off the ground, and it was a pretty tall flame. Not short like a candle, more like a torch flame. As I got closer, it began to dim until it went out, just as I walked up to the grave. I thought surely someone set a torch of some kind on the ground. Nothing. I would have seen or heard someone running off into the woods. The graves were all too small to hide behind. The grave was a large granite slab, so nothing could be buried in the ground. I couldn't come up with a logical explanation. The other kids in the group were just as dumbfounded as I was. We weren't really terrified, we were more in awe and disbelief than anything. I've never seen anything so bizarre in my life. That was so long ago. I was new to the area and didn't know where I was, so I don't remember where the cemetery was. But I think I've located it using Google Earth, and I've thought about going back one day with a video camera. My parents have lived in this same house for over 30 years. I lived there from ages 6 to 17, when I moved to another city for college. After that, I graduated and started working there. I would come to visit, but just a couple times throughout the year. Now, about 10 years ago, I had a near-death experience. I almost drowned at the beach and I had sensory memories coming back right when I was about to drown. I could feel the memories as if I was inside them. The one I still remember very vividly is the warmth and smell of my mom's lips when she kissed me on the nose when I was little. She used to kiss me like that whenever we were cuddling, or when she left me and picked me up at school, etc. I also remembered the touch of my father's warm hands whenever he touched my feet to wake me up, or how my closest friends and I always hug each other so tight and for so long, and it feels amazing. I felt all that and more. But I also felt something changed in me. I started to feel vibes in people. I cut people off my life because I started to feel that they were not honest or good people, which turned out to be very accurate. In a party I attended, I met some of my sister-in-law's relatives, and one uncle in particular gave me a weird vibe. I couldn't explain it, but something about him didn't sit right with me. I only mentioned it to my mom, but as I was trying to figure it out, I told her. He gives me SA vibes. He does something to his children, I'm sure. A couple months later, my sister-in-law told my mom that his uncle had had problems with the whole family, and the siblings decided to take the kids away from him, but didn't press any charges. He had been molesting his own children since his wife left him. I also started feeling energized in places I had been before, and places I had never been to. But I felt something weird I couldn't always explain. Now, a couple of months ago, I moved back to my parents' house because I bought a piece of land and I'm having my house built. But ever since I came back, I keep seeing these shadows at night, passing by, peeking out the door. Sometimes from the corner of my eye, I get to see them. I'd never seen them until now. They seemed curious about me since I had caught them watching me. I've also heard some noises, but just tapping on the wall or my desk or the door. Nothing else so far. This happened back in 2008. I was a junior in high school, hanging out with an old girlfriend of mine and her friend at my house, while the rest of my family flew out to Washington to visit family the previous night. The night was any typical teenager hangout. We ordered Pizza Hut, played Guitar Hero, and played some homemade spirit games thing with fire. You light the fire and ask the ghost a question. If the fire moves, it means yada yada yada. All dumb, profoundly normal things. For reference, we were all hanging out in the attic, which was my bedroom at the time. The staircase led right into my living room, which had a bead door at the bottom of them. You can usually hear someone coming through them to get up, but this shook all of us to our core. We were well and done playing ghost games and playing Guitar Hero, when out of nowhere during a break, a blood-curdling scream from a woman shrieked from the bottom of the stairwell. It almost sounded fake, like a corny movie scream, but loud and panicked scream to be sure. It sounded legit. We froze and heard nothing else. No beads, no footsteps, nothing. My house was old, so you often heard and felt people moving around in it, but there was nothing. I got the courage to charge the living room with a pocket knife after yelling that we were calling the cops, but to our surprise, there was nothing. The doors and windows were locked. It was the middle of a particularly nasty Michigan snowstorm, and there weren't even footprints outside the house. We all ran outside and went to the end of the short driveway, looking in the window from afar for an intruder. We called the police, and they came and searched the entire house for us, while we all sat in my 90s Pontiac Grand Prix. After about an hour, they came back and found nobody hiding in the house. After this, I ran into the house, grabbed my essentials, and drove to my best friend's house. I ended up crashing at his place for 3 months after that. I refused to sleep in my house until my family all got home from Washington. To this day, I still have no fucking clue what it was, but it sends shivers down my spine thinking about that scream, even as an adult. Nothing else ever happened at that house, and nothing really happened before either. It was random as fuck. I also saw my friend's dead grandma through a window on 2 occasions, along with some other stuff from her. I've lived in a very old house for about 6 years, and in these 6 years, I've seen many things lurking around. For context, I live in a city and we're surrounded by neighbours, but my house was built around 100 years ago, long before there was a city around it, and was originally surrounded by farmland. There have been a lot of questions surrounding exactly when the house was built. The elderly woman we bought it from said it was built in 1908, exactly 100 years before I was born. But we recently had it appraised and were told it was likely built in 1926. This was backed up when we found newspapers from the mid-1920s lining the 100-year-old windows while putting in new windows. Ever since we first moved in, I've been seeing things around the house. From people out of the corner of my eye, to my name being called while home alone, to full face-to-face meetings with people who were never there. I had too many experiences to count. I was always a child with an active imagination, but as I got older, I began to realise it may not have been my imagination. One night, I was standing in my upstairs bathroom with the door open to the hallway, braiding my hair. I saw 2 grey figures walk past the open door and to my parents' office, which was right next to the bathroom. Both my parents have light grey hoodies, so I assumed it was them and wanted to say something to them, but something stopped me. The 2 figures disappeared, and I realised I never heard the door open. I then heard my parents talking in the kitchen, and I realised they were both downstairs. I immediately ran downstairs, but didn't tell them what had happened. These 2 figures showed up multiple more times, but none of them were as dramatic as the first time. When I was 11 or 12, every night at sunset, I'd be laying in my bed doing whatever. Reading, playing games, but I would see an old lady standing at the edge of my bed just watching me. I was never threatened or scared by her, she was just there. This went on for a few months and I thought nothing of it, which was weird, because I'm usually easily freaked out by very small things. I told my mum about it, and she told me about how her grandmother would visit her after she passed, and she thought it might have been her looking after her great-granddaughter. I thought it was sweet and went on with my life. This soon stopped and everything went back to normal. About a year later, my mum found an old photo of one of the previous owners and showed me. It was the same woman I'd been seeing nearly daily the year before. A few months ago, I noticed a single kiss mark appeared on the TV downstairs. I thought it was so weird, because my mum and dad are obviously not doing it. My brother isn't either, and I didn't. My younger cousin is the one who mostly uses the downstairs TV, and she isn't even tall enough to reach the TV. I thought it was so weird, but I ignored it. My cousin the other day came to me in the morning scared, saying she saw something in the downstairs bathroom and heard voices telling her to do things. She's 7, by the way, and I did think it was weird, so I told her she could shower in my room. My parents told her she was probably just having a nightmare, but they're super religious, so they did some whole ritual screaming prayer thing. That night, I was laying in my bed and noticed a kiss mark on my mirror. I definitely didn't place it there. Mind you, this is out of character for anyone living there to do, and I asked them all, and they said they had no idea how it got there. Today, I looked at the TV again and noticed instead of there being one kiss mark, there are now multiple. I'm low-key trying to just ignore this, but this is creepy as fuck. I've always thought my house was haunted, but I've never seen actual signs. I've always had this theory that fear draws in spirits, and ever since I've started having an inclination to dark things and listening to metal rock, my parents have been freaking out and saying they've been having dreams about demons in my room. I think they're ridiculous, but now I'm wondering, what if their fear drew in something? My friend said kiss marks aren't threatening, and it could just be my spirit guide. I'm not sure if I believe in spirit guides or not. Does anyone have an idea? For context, this happened in like 2013, so I was around 8 years old. My brother was 10 years older than me, so when he graduated high school, I was still in elementary school. My memory of him kind of fades as time goes by, but I still have some sweet memories of when I brought him apple slices after he got in a fight with my mom. I also remember seeing him and his friends in front of the school library near the 400-meter track where we did activities, and I ran to hug him. After he graduated, he went to the US for college. We would sometimes get phone calls from him or FaceTime, but not much, and all I knew was that he was in America and attending university. But I also miss him, and I would sometimes ask my parents when he was returning. My parents would say that he'll be back during the holidays. I got so excited. Then, for a couple of days in a row, I had super vivid dreams that my brother came back with his luggage, and me running to the door to greet him. I remember that when he stepped into our house, the background behind him was only bright light, and I couldn't see our garden as I would usually see. I can't remember the rest of the dream, but I think that was just it. I woke up, truly believed that my brother was home, and went upstairs to his room to check if he was back. He wasn't. Then, in the afternoon, right after my multiple dreams after school, my parents got a phone call, and my mom looked like she was holding back tears. Later in the evening, I remembered my dream, so I shared with my parents that I dreamt about my brother coming back and asked when my brother was coming back. When my mom heard, she started bursting into tears, and my dad brought me aside and just told me not to talk about my brother around my mom. Days after, I didn't have any dreams about my brother coming back. Later, my dad eventually told me that my brother died, and they were informed by the phone call of this news. Until now, they still won't let me know what happened to him, but only that he passed away. I grew up in a funeral home. Okay, firstly, I'd like to say if it's hard to believe anything I say on here, trust me, I understand. I've never felt believed while talking about this. When I was 11, me and my family moved into a huge 6-bedroom, 2-bath house. At the time, my mom was a very spiritual person and very into the supernatural. My dad, knowing this willfully, kept the fact that it was a funeral home from my mom, knowing damn well she would have no part in living in a house of death. Well, about a year after living there, a priest in a wheelchair knocked on our door and asked if they could speak to one of my parents. My mom, being the only one home, happily invited him in. Since it was so long ago, I don't remember the whole conversation, but basically he informed her that our house used to be a funeral home. To no surprise, my mom was very concerned about this, so the priest, in what I assume was a way to alleviate our concerns, offered to cleanse the house. The darkness and hatred that was felt in that house still messes with me today. That baptism woke something up and made her very angry. I don't know how to put this without sounding crazy, but basically me and my friends found a tombstone in the basement. The tombstone had a pillar inside of it that was connected to the living room, basically holding up the floor. The tombstone was upside down and broken at the top. It just had one word on it. In broad letters, it spelled, "Wow." I thought nothing of this until I was 15, and my mom died in that house on the living room floor. It occurred to me that the tombstone didn't say "wow." The fucking thing said "mom." I want to burn that house down. I know it's all a coincidence, but is it really? I went to a special needs school for 9 years. The buildings are over 130 years old and have a lot of history, including a tuberculosis treatment centre. The basement was where the creative things were, like paint, stone cutter tools, the library and some other things. I was 13 or 14 years old at the time. I was also very creative. I loved to go down there after school because I could hide there and be myself. To get there, you have to walk through a very loud door, go left and go through another door, glass door, and then through the last door. You could always hear it when someone was coming down there. Always. The person that was supposed to take care of me left and I was alone in the basement, in that room. I heard the door and everything close and then walk up the stairs. Then I heard a whisper. I couldn't hear what was said, but it was a woman. The one that was taking care of me was a man, so it wasn't him. I looked to where I heard the whisper, and this is what I saw. A transparent woman in an old-fashioned clothing. From what I could tell, it also looked like something was running down her face. We made eye contact. Surprisingly, I wasn't scared because I didn't think about it. It was normal to see things down there, to hear things. I asked if she was okay. She screamed in a way I can't describe. It reminded me of a banshee scream or wail. She then disappeared. The thing is, my stepdad's father passed away a little over a week later. To this day, I have no idea what I saw or heard. I know banshees are not from Denmark, but that scream, it was odd and different. Not like a normal scream. Last night, I had a dream that I was at some fancy dinner-like place with my mum's father. I called him Poppy. All I remember from the dream is sitting next to him at the fancy table, and I believe we were exchanging drinks. Like, I had a Coca-Cola in a fancy wine glass, and he had water, but it seemed like we were passing it to one another. He frequently bartends after retirement, and I always remember being so excited to ask for bar Coke as a kid. So at first, I chalked up the dream to that. But then this morning, my mum started to tell me that she had a weird dream last night, and I immediately spoke up and told her I had a dream about Poppy. She responded with, "Well, that's weird. I had a dream about Poppy too." I told her about how we were at some fancy dinner venue place, and she said that her dream was exactly the same, except she was off doing something else at the dinner party rather than sitting with Poppy and I. Which is kind of funny, because I don't remember seeing her in my dream at all. It's just crazy that her and I had pretty much the same dream about her dad. My brother and I also had the same dream when we were kids, also with Poppy in it, but before he passed away. It was about our grandparents' dog, Molly, and that Poppy had to take her to get put down. One day a few years ago, my brother randomly told me about this dream, and that it was weird to him because he felt like Molly wasn't really there for the next 2 weeks, before she actually had to be put down. And I was absolutely blown away that I had the same exact dream and feeling about Molly around the same time. Two years ago, my mum moved house and incidentally, I moved away also, but it's still home when it's needed. I'm currently here on holiday, and I'm spending my nights in the caravan on the front lawn. Great little van, but I have to keep it locked along with any doors or gates at the house whenever I'm going out or anything, because my area is chock-a-block with filthy little thieves. Anyhow, I'm quite dopey, and sometimes I forget things. So tonight, while my mum and stepfather were sound asleep, me being me, I went to go grab some munchy food from inside. I opened the screen door only to realise the main door is locked. So I thought, fuck it, I'll just wait for breakfast. I start to walk back down the lawn, and I hear a noise that took me a second to process. The main door just opened. I turn back and see a shadowy figure in the door, and think it's just Mum because the lights are off in the house. I walk up, open the screen, and start to walk in. Try to push the main door open a bit more, but it was like something was behind it. I checked around the entire front area, then made a beeline for my parents' room, where they were both still just laying there asleep. There's absolutely nobody else in the house, and the wind we go get definitely isn't strong enough to open a locked door. What the fuck just opened my door for me? The dogs start barking at me when I initially tried to open the door, but then stopped right before it went ahead and opened itself too. They still sat at the door. They just started acting a little off after the door opened. For context, I was in my preteen stage when my grandma passed. I can recall every dream I've had about her after, and the fact that she never said anything to me until the very last dream However, she always had very distinct facial features. The first dream I had was nearly right after she passed. I believe it was the very same night. This dream was themed on a Sunday. I know this because before she got emergency custody of me, she'd take me back home on Sundays after coming over that Friday. We got in the car. She didn't look at me or make eye contact, but she had this grim look on her face. No smile, which was very unusual for her. We drive up to the stop sign, make a right turn, and everything fades into white. Standing around were many people, some of which I had known from my childhood, but had already long passed away. Some chatting here and there, but no distinct words I could hear. Then I woke up. The second dream isn't very necessary. I don't know where I was, but my grandpa and I were in this huge warehouse. The only time I saw her, she was laying on the ground, definitely dead. Third dream was years later. I was at their house, the very house she died in. I looked in the walkway and saw her standing there with an angry look on her face. Also seemed to be disappointed. This is strange because at that time I had gotten bad into drug use and already got diagnosed with alcoholism. I was 15, by the way, so I didn't even know someone that young could be diagnosed with something of that sort, but it happened. She hated drugs because of my dad and uncle. Believed it was sinful, rightly so. Fourth dream was after I got clean off of the drugs. I was happy, got a job, and finally cut off the people I needed out of my life. This dream consisted of her and I sitting on a couch. We had the TV tray out in front of us, which was a normal occurrence, and she finally looked happy. The only thing she said to me was, "You'll never see me again," with a smile on her face. After that I woke up, and sure enough, I've never had a dream of her since. Some would say it's a weird coincidence, but I'm sure there's much more to it. At least, that's what I like to believe. I have a bad case of an apparent black hole in my apartment. It started with the knives. Back when I moved in, I had a full set of knives and one of them would disappear in the span of months within each other. I ended up having to buy more, and now those are disappearing again. Then it was a whole bag of pastries. I put the bag on the table and went out for an hour with my roomie, and when I came back they were gone. And I mean, the whole bag. I also had some spoons gone, whole cans of tuna, and as of yesterday, one apple of two I bought. I found out about the apples because my cat dropped them, but I could only find one and I searched the whole area for it. No one else but me. My roomie and my parents have keys to the apartment. My parents live almost 400 kilometers away. For the cutlery, I may or may not have thrown them away, with the trash on accident, but I cannot explain the pastries or the apple. There are probably a lot of other stuff missing that I'm not remembering or not noticing, but it's been going on for years now, and I wanted to share. Yesterday, my grandma, who I'm very close to, passed away. She had multiple major strokes in a single night and was suffering a major brain bleed. Doctors said 75% of her brain was damaged and she wouldn't wake up again. We made the decision to end life support as we knew she wouldn't want to be kept alive as a vegetable past her time. I'd always heard stories of people dying loved ones sitting up before passing, or saying the names of those that had died before, or even just opening their eyes or throwing their arms up. Since my grandma's brain activity was so limited, I knew there would be no such signs, no matter how much I knew they'd comfort me. The ICU door for my grandma's room was very heavy and hard to unlatch, and had stayed closed all day and yesterday to give us some privacy with her. I struggled every time I had to open it, as you had to really push down to unlatch it. We were all sitting in a room waiting for the final shoe to drop when the door unlatched and opened. It opened up a good way pretty quickly, not as if it had been shoved, but more like someone was just opening it. We waited for a nurse to come inside, but nobody was there. I got up and closed the door, making sure to push it hard into place. About 5 minutes later, we heard the hard sound of the door unlatching, and it swung open again with controlled quickness. stopping just short of slamming into a table. This time, we left it open. The doctors were expecting her to survive at least a few days after ending life support, but she died not an hour later, after the door opened. At the end, she was not in pain, and she passed as if falling asleep. My mum and I are happy knowing she had people there to walk her home. I was in the village when I was spending time with my granny. I was basically there because my mum sent me there to get some rest. The street where she lives is just the road with private houses along it, and there was a house where in front of it were two perfectly symmetrical trees. The tree was about 10 meters high and was looking like a tree pole that was uprooted from the earth. There were no leaves and even branches on it. The top of the tree was like the bottom of an average uprooted tree. Roots were on top of it. They were both almost black. I believe they were dried up, maybe pine trees that were cut. But how did they manage to dry so much? If that's the case, it was cut decades ago. Also, why were there such enormous trees? It was not a half-abandoned wild village in the middle of nowhere. It was just a small settlement, a couple kilometres from a normal town. At some point, when I visited my grandma again, there were not just no trees, but not even land without grass on spots where they were or something. Of course, no one knows what trees I was talking about. I remember there was a photo of me with these trees in the background, exactly the same trees. Not as pine trees, but identical black dead pillars. But guess what? I can't find it. There was a bunch of black and white photos of my grandmother's fathers and other relatives with that tree in the background. Not as pine trees, but the identical black dead fucking pillars. But guess what? I know they were there. I didn't believe in paranormal stuff before, but now I'm not sure anymore. My mom's ex has been doing black magic to her. She has screenshots of him talking about it, and my mom showed a person that does magic too. And she told her that she had something like a curse and a dead person was following her. To me, all that sounds crazy, but the thing is, I feel it every time my mom feels it. Other than misfortune, my mom can get sick and gets a really bad backache, and she says that she feels like it's burning. She's gone to the doctor, and she's 100% healthy, and I always told her that it was in her mind. But one day, I was visiting her, and she told me she was feeling it. So I walked to her and started giving her a massage while she was sitting down. A few seconds later, I started to feel a rage that I've never felt in my life. And then I started crying and having a panic attack. In my mind, I thought it was maybe my head playing tricks on me. But after that, every time my mom feels the burning in her back, I feel a tingle in the top of my head. Like my head is freezing and a wave of sadness comes and I start crying. No matter how far we are, every time I feel it, I call her or text her, asking if she's feeling it. And every time I'm correct. I don't know what to do. I guess I just wanted to tell someone and get it out of my chest. I had a panic attack a few minutes ago because of it, and my mom was feeling it too. My life has been kind of messed up lately, and I don't know if it's my bad luck or something is actually messing with it. I'm just tired of it. My dad was a builder, contracted to the local council to carry out works on council buildings. In the UK, this also includes homes and flats. My dad was told his next piece of work would be in a flat building, with multiple rooms and 3 levels. Homes and flats like these, when no one lives in them at the time, are called voids. The building is just empty rooms. When this happens, the council put big heavy metal doors on the building to prevent thieves from getting in. You need a set of keys provided by the council. To get ahead of himself, my dad wanted to see the scale of the work that he'd be undertaking, rather than going there completely under-equipped and unprepared. So my dad opens up and takes a look around. The 4 rooms on the ground floor are the same on the 2nd and 3rd floor, all connected by a staircase which has a central shaft through the middle. You can see right to the ceiling on the 3rd floor. Stairs have metal bars for railings. A big job, but achievable in a few days. Gut the place out, replaster a few walls, and a repaint job. My dad goes to lock up, but he feels someone behind him. This, I'm told, is not uncommon. Local people see builders go into empty buildings, and they want to see what they can take. So naturally, my dad turns around. "Mate, you're going to have to leave, I'm locking up." But he said it to no one. No one was around him or had been in the building. Thinking this was just an odd sensation, he thought nothing else about it, locked up and went home. My dad told my mum what happened, but it was more of a passing remark like, "Oh, this happened today, weird," and nothing else was said. Anyway, the weekend passes and my dad and his friend Martin go back to the job on Monday and begin opening up and proceed with the work. A local resident walks up and asks them how things are going, to which both agree it's going well, and some other small talk. He changes the subject. "It's a shame what happened there, isn't it?" Both my dad and his working friend were confused. "A shame? What's a shame?" "Poor girl came home from school a few months ago and saw her dad hanging, tied himself to the railing and jumped." My dad, of course, was now scared and felt that familiar shiver go up him. He didn't tell the local guy what he had felt, but he told his friend. Martin refused to go into the building alone, and they both agreed that they would always leave the central door open to make sure there was an exit if needed. My dad would be the first to tell you he doesn't really believe in ghosts, and he would also say he's never seen a ghost, but he did say this was the oddest experience he's ever had, and still can't explain it. When my mother was a little girl, she spent her early years in a remote area of Mexico. No electricity, no running water, and definitely no air conditioning. Due to so many people all living in one small house, it wasn't uncommon for her and a few other of her siblings to sleep on the porch. Yes, you heard that right. They slept on Pilates outside. She recalls it was actually much cooler some nights on the porch than it was in the house. The porch had a screen that my grandfather installed, and he also built their house by his own hand. The closest neighbour was miles away, so from my understanding, the house was pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Now this is where the ghost story begins. My mom and 3 of her other siblings were the lucky ones, who got to sleep outside every night. They never had any problems or fears until the night the baker boy began to come round. A small child with golden curls, dressed in white baking attire, wearing a mask that was a real skinned pig. He would walk in circles around the house, reciting a certain phrase that my mom never really understood, because it wasn't in Spanish or English. At first they were scared, but every time they grew to appreciate his presence, it was almost as if he were walking around the house to protect them from whatever fate had maybe happened to him. They never knew who he was, or if he was even real, but they would all see him. My grandpa never believed them and assumed they were making it all up to come inside the house, but they swore they weren't. It wasn't until over time an outline of his path began to show up around the house. Needless to say, they didn't stay in that house much longer and moved before they eventually made it into the States. The strangest part is that before my grandpa died, he told my mom he had finally seen him, the blonde boy with the pig mask. When I was younger, I'd like to talk to ghosts. I was only told this by my parents recently. They told me that I was always talk to a man that stood in front of my bedroom window, and when asked who I was talking to, I would reply with George. Obviously, as I was only 4 or 5 at the time, I have no memory of what I would talk about, but we lived next to an old man called Mr. Todd, whom my parents were close to. My mum ended up asking who lived in the house before us, and sure enough he replied with George. When my mum asked if he had anything to do with the bedroom window, Mr. Todd said he would always stand at the window just looking out of it, and that's how he would spend most of his days. I've been told that I was a very weird child growing up, and that story isn't the only ghost I would talk to. As my parents describe it, I would always talk to a man on top of the wardrobe. Unfortunately, I haven't been told much about this one, as it's always overshadowed by the George story. I would also go on about having a past life and how I'd bring up my other family. I have a feeling that I had a past life in a time frame of World War I or II. My reasoning is that my older brother told me that one day I started singing an old war song word for word, which neither my parents or my brother had ever heard before. Being a believer of past lives, I find it fascinating, as I've had my own experience of it, yet frustrating that I was so young that my memory of it all is limited. This happened a few months ago, but I still remember vividly what happened. On September 7th, I was alone in my room at around 1:30 a.m. on a phone call with my girlfriend. I was the only one awake in the house at the time. Me and her sleep together on the phone, so we call every night, and still do to this day. We were talking as usual, and obviously nothing was scary or eerie. I had my lights off in my room, so the only light was my phone screen right in front of me. My room is pitch black with the lights off as expected, so it wasn't scary for me. But that's not what spooked me. As she's telling me about how her day at work was, I hear a very low voice saying something coming from where my door is, but very quietly, to the point where it's almost a whisper. I couldn't make out any words, but I could tell it was speech. I told my girlfriend to be quiet for a sec so I could listen. At first, I thought it was my brother, whose room is right next to mine, but he was already asleep. He does the same routine to go to bed every day. He uses the restroom outside our rooms, turns off the hallway light, closes the room to his door, and turns off his light. This happened an hour before I heard the voice. His voice is not that deep. He's 15 years old, and since he hangs out with his friends over Discord, I know what his friend sounds like through the walls and the pitch of his voice. This was not him. I could hear it clearly as if it was standing in my room, right past the door. But I couldn't see anything, so I used my phone flashlight to try and see what was there, without getting out of my bed. After looking around for a few minutes, I decided it was time for bed, so I told my girlfriend that we should go to sleep. I woke up the next morning as usual, and nothing scary has happened since. So yesterday, my mum told me a story about something that happened to her at work. My mum has always been a huge skeptic, as I have been myself, but this has probably freaked us both out, as we can't explain it. I'm curious to see what others think. My mum works at a pharmacy as a dispenser. She has a colleague that she talks to every day, who's also a skeptic, but has an interest in the paranormal. She told my mum a story about how she went to visit a graveyard to visit a loved one with one of her friends. They were the only ones in the graveyard, but they heard a female humming. They assumed it was someone crouching behind a grave, tending to it, and had a look around. They eventually came to a grave where the sound appeared to be coming from, but nobody was there. They checked their phones and any other devices and nothing. A little freaked out, they went to the pub nearby and had some food. As they were chatting, they both went silent at the same time and froze, as they could hear the humming again. They carried on eating and eventually parted to go home. Later that night, my mum's colleague got a call from her friend who was hysterical. She cried down the phone that she'd heard the humming in a house. Mum's colleague calmed her down and reassured her that it was nothing and she was probably just hearing things. After putting the phone down, she went upstairs to bed as it was late. She heard the humming in her bedroom. My mum, upon being told this, wasn't that amazed, as she just brushed it off as a story, being the skeptic she is. She left the room and walked down the long hallway leading to the top of the stairs. She says she heard a female humming right behind her, different notes, but only lasting 2 or 3 seconds. She turned around to laugh at a colleague, thinking she was taking the mick. Nobody was there. Her colleague was still in the room on the other end of the hallway, and nobody else was on that floor with them. There's no PA system or any kind of speakers, as she didn't have her phone or anything on her. I've never seen my mum so freaked out before, as she's a very straight-laced person and always tries to debunk everything paranormal. I can't think of anything either. What do you guys think?
You are listening to the content of paranormalm.com.